In the small village of Willow Creek, a story had been told for years. Deep in the woods, hidden behind vines and moss, was an old tunnel. People said it was a place of mystery, but no one dared to go near. One summer evening, a curious boy named Leo found the entrance. The air around it was cold, even though the sun was shining. He could hear soft whispers coming from the darkness, like voices calling his name. Leo's heart raced, but his curiosity was stronger. He stepped closer, brushing the vines away. The whispers grew louder, but he couldn't understand the words. They sounded like secrets waiting to be told. His hands trembled as he touched the stone walls of the tunnel. "What lies inside?" he whispered to himself. The forest grew silent, as if holding its breath. Leo couldn't resist the pull of the tunnel. With a small flashlight in his hand, he took his first step inside. The air felt heavy, and the walls were damp. Shadows danced as the light flickered. The whispers became clearer now, but still, he could not make out the words. It felt as if someone was following him, though no one was there. The deeper Leo walked, the quieter the whispers became. He reached a spot where the tunnel split into two paths. A strange mark was carved into the wall. It looked like an arrow pointing left, but the whispers seemed to come from the right. Leo hesitated. He could feel the tunnel's mystery pulling him further. Leo decided to follow the whispers. The right path was darker and narrower. His flashlight flickered, and for a moment it went out. Panic filled his chest as he stood in the darkness. Then, the whispers returned, louder than ever. They echoed around him, like 100 voices speaking at once. When the light returned, Leo saw something strange. A shadow moved across the wall, but there was no one there. His heart pounded as he called out. "Who's there?" The whispers stopped suddenly, leaving an eerie silence. He felt like the tunnel was alive, watching his every move. As Leo walked further, he noticed drawings on the walls. They looked like stories of people who had entered the tunnel long ago. One drawing showed a group of villagers holding torches, searching for something. Another showed a person standing alone, surrounded by shadows. The whispers returned, softer this time, almost gentle. Leo touched one of the drawings, and for a moment, the whispers stopped. The air grew colder, and he felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned quickly, but no one was there. "Leave now," a voice whispered faintly. It was so close that he could feel the breath on his ear. Leo's legs felt heavy, but he knew he had to move. The whispers turned into words now. "Turn back," they said, over and over. But something deep inside told him to keep going. He saw a faint light at the end of the tunnel. His heart filled with hope as he ran towards it. When he reached the end, the light disappeared, and he found himself in a large, empty room. The walls were covered with names, carved deep into the stone. One name stood out: Leo. His flashlight flickered and went out. The whispers surrounded him, louder than ever. The tunnel had one last message: you were warned. Leo stood frozen in the darkness of the large, empty room. The whispers surrounded him like a soft wind, but they felt heavy. He tried to turn on his flashlight, but it wouldn't work. A dim light appeared on the walls, glowing faintly, showing the names carved deep into the stone. One by one, the names began to disappear, fading as if they were never there. "Why is my name here?" Leo whispered, his voice trembling. The whispers didn't answer but grew louder, almost angry. Suddenly, the ground beneath him shook, and a cold wind rushed through the tunnel. Leo's instincts told him to run, but his feet felt stuck, as if the tunnel itself was holding him in place. As the whispers continued, Leo noticed something new. Faint shapes appeared in the glow on the wall's faces, blurry and distant. They looked sad, almost pleading for help. "Who are you?" Leo asked. For a moment, the whispers stopped, and one voice spoke clearly. "We are the forgotten." The faces grew sharper, their eyes following Leo as he moved. "Leave before it's too late," another voice warned. Leo backed away, his heart pounding. "I don't want to hurt anyone," he said aloud. The whispers returned, softer now, but their words were clear. "It's not you we fear. It's the tunnel." The room began to grow darker, the faint light on the walls fading. Shadows moved around Leo, twisting and curling like smoke. He felt them brush against his skin, cold and heavy. One shadow stopped in front of him, growing larger and darker. It formed into a shape of figure with no face but deep, hollow eyes. "Why are you here?" the shadow asked in a deep, echoing voice. Leo swallowed hard, trying to find words. "I was curious," he admitted. The shadow leaned closer, its hollow eyes staring into his. "Curiosity has a price," it said. The other shadows circled him, and the whispers grew louder, like a storm inside his mind. The shadows pushed Leo forward, guiding him deeper into the tunnel. He stumbled but kept moving, his heart racing. The whispers began to change, sounding more like cries of warning. At the end of the path, he saw another room, brighter than the first. In the center was a large, glowing stone, pulsing like a heartbeat. Leo felt drawn to the stone, unable to resist. As he approached, the whispers became desperate. "Do not touch it," they screamed. But his hand moved on its own, reaching for the glowing surface. The moment his fingers touched it, a wave of cold energy rushed through him, and the shadows shrieked in unison. Leo woke up lying on the forest floor, the tunnel nowhere in sight. The sun was shining, and everything seemed normal. But something was different. He could still hear the whispers, faint and distant, as if they were trapped inside his mind. He tried to shake them off, but they followed him wherever he went. Days turned into weeks, and the whispers never stopped. At night, he dreamed of the tunnel, the shadows, and the glowing stone. He realized the truth: the tunnel had marked him, making him a part of its story forever. Leo tried to live his life as if nothing had changed, but the whispers were always there. Sometimes they were faint, like the rustle of leaves, and other times they grew louder, like voices calling his name. He couldn't tell anyone who would believe him. The tunnel had left its mark, a secret only he could bear. One evening, Leo decided to return to the woods. He needed answers. Maybe if he found the tunnel again, he could stop the whispers. As the sun set, the forest became eerily quiet. When he reached the spot where the entrance had been, it was gone. Only a patch of untouched earth remained, as if the tunnel had never existed. That night, Leo had a vivid dream. He was back in the tunnel, standing in the room with the glowing stone. The shadows surrounded him, their voices overlapping in a haunting chorus. "You belong to us now," they said. "The tunnel never lets go." Leo woke up drenched in sweat, the whispers louder than ever. He tried to shake the dream off, but the feeling stayed with him. Strange things began happening around him. Lights flickered, and shadows moved in corners where no one stood. It felt as if the tunnel was following him, its presence lingering like a ghost. "What do you want from me?" Leo whispered into the darkness, but no answer came. One day, while cleaning his room, Leo found something strange in his pocket, a small, rusty key. He didn't remember picking it up, but it looked old, like something from the tunnel. The moment he touched it, the whispers stopped. For the first time in weeks, there was silence. Leo stared at the key, feeling a strange mix of fear and hope. Could this be the answer? That night, the shadows returned, but they were different. They didn't move or whisper. Instead, they formed the shape of the tunnel's entrance on his wall. It was a message the key was meant to be used. Leo knew he had to go back. The key felt warm in his hand as he walked through the forest. To his shock, the tunnel's entrance was there again, hidden behind the same vines and moss. It looked exactly as it had before, as if it had been waiting for him. With a deep breath, Leo stepped inside. The air was heavy, and the whispers began softly guiding him deeper. This time, he didn't feel afraid. He followed the path to the glowing stone, and there in the center of the room was an old iron door he hadn't noticed before. The key fit perfectly. As he turned it, the stone's light dimmed, and the room filled with a deafening silence. The door creaked open, revealing a small chamber filled with glowing symbols. In the center was a pedestal holding a book. The whispers returned, clearer than ever. Read, they urged. Leo hesitated but approached the book. Its pages were blank except for one sentence to end the whispers: one must choose to stay. Leo's heart sank. He understood what it meant. If he stayed in the tunnel, its curse would end, but he would never leave. The shadows circled him, waiting for his decision. "I don't want this," Leo said, his voice breaking. But the whispers replied, "The choice is yours." With trembling hands, Leo placed the key on the pedestal and turned to leave. As he stepped out of the tunnel, the entrance vanished behind him. The whispers were gone, but so was a part of him. He would never forget the shadows, the stone, and the tunnel that almost took him. For days after his return, Leo felt an unusual calm. The whispers were gone, and the shadows no longer lingered in the corners of his home. But the silence brought its own kind of fear. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching him, waiting for the right moment. One evening, as he sat alone, he noticed a faint glow outside his window. He froze, recognizing the eerie light from the tunnel. When he stepped outside, there was nothing there, but the glow stayed in the corner of his vision, like a memory that wouldn't fade. "Am I really free?" Leo whispered to himself, but deep down, he already knew the answer. Leo's nights were restless. He dreamed of the tunnel, the stone, and the key he had left behind. In his dreams, the whispers returned, louder and more desperate. "You cannot escape," they said. The tunnel never forgets. Each morning, he woke up with a heavy feeling in his chest, as if he had been running all night. One day, while walking through town, Leo saw the glow again. It was faint but unmistakable, reflecting in a shop window. He turned quickly, but nothing was there. People around him seemed normal, unaware of the strange light. "Why is it following me?" Leo wondered, his fear growing with each passing moment. The whispers returned one night, faint but persistent. "Come back," they said. "The key is yours." Leo tried to ignore them, but they grew louder, filling his room with their eerie chorus. The shadows reappeared, swirling around him like a dark storm. Leo's hands trembled as he realized the truth: the tunnel wasn't finished with him. It wanted him back. "What do you want from me?" he shouted, his voice echoing in the empty room. The whispers paused, Then one voice answered clearly to complete what you started. Unable to bear the torment, Leo made his decision. He returned to the forest, the glow guiding him like a beacon. The tunnel's entrance was waiting, more vivid and alive than ever. As he stepped inside, the whispers greeted him, their tone softer this time, almost welcoming. The path to the stone room felt shorter, as if the tunnel itself was eager to bring him back. When he reached the glowing stone, he saw the key on the pedestal, right where he had left it. The iron door was gone, replaced by a swirling vortex of light and shadow. Step through, the whispers commanded. Leo stood before the vortex, his heart pounding. He didn't know what lay beyond, but the whispers promised freedom if he entered. "Will I ever come back?" he asked aloud, his voice trembling. The whispers didn't answer, but the shadows formed a path leading to the light. With a deep breath, Leo stepped into the vortex. For a moment, everything was silent and still, as if the world had stopped. Then, a wave of energy surged through him, and he felt himself falling into endless darkness. The last thing he heard was a single whisper, "You are part of the tunnel now." Leo was never seen again, but some say on quiet nights you can hear his voice among the whispers, guiding others who dare to enter the forgotten tunnel. Years passed, but the story of the forgotten tunnel didn't fade. Locals began sharing tales of strange lights in the woods and eerie whispers on the wind. Some claimed to have seen shadowy figures near the spot where the tunnel once stood. Though no one dared to go too close, the fear of the unknown lingered. Among the rumors, one stood out: a lone traveler had entered the forest late one night and never returned. The whispers were growing louder, calling new souls. It was as if the tunnel's hunger had awoken again, searching for those who couldn't resist its mysterious pull. One stormy evening, a stranger arrived in the village. His clothes were torn, and his eyes were filled with terror. He claimed he had ventured near the forest and heard voices calling his name. "Stay away," he warned, his voice shaking. "The tunnel is alive, and it's waiting for you." Despite his warning, some villagers dismissed him as a madman, but others believed him, recalling the stories of those who had disappeared before. The stranger stayed only one night, leaving behind a single chilling message: "It doesn't stop until it has what it wants." One curious boy named Sam couldn't resist the growing mystery. The idea of the tunnel fascinated him, and he spent hours searching for clues in old books and maps. One day, he found a faded drawing of the forest with a symbol marking the spot where the tunnel had once been. Late one night, Sam ventured into the woods, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. At first, all was quiet, but then he heard a faint whisper. It was soft, almost like a breeze, but it sent chills down his spine. "Who's there?" he called, but the only response was the wind rustling the leaves. As Sam wandered deeper, the whispers grew louder, forming words. "Come closer," they said. "We've been waiting." His heart pounded, but he couldn't turn back. Something about the voices felt familiar, almost comforting, as if they knew him. When he reached the spot marked on the map, the ground beneath him shifted. Slowly, the earth opened, revealing the entrance to the tunnel. It was as if the forest itself had conspired to lead him there. Sam hesitated, but a strange force pulled him forward. The tunnel's darkness seemed alive, and the whispers surrounded him, urging him to enter. Sam stepped inside, and the air grew heavy with an eerie silence. The tunnel looked just as the stories described: dark, endless, and alive. As he walked deeper, he saw the glowing stone in the distance, its light pulsing like a heartbeat. The whispers grew louder. echoing all around him. When Sam reached the stone, he felt a strange sense of peace, as if he had finally found where he belonged. "Welcome," the voices said in unison. The shadows moved closer, wrapping around him like a warm embrace. Sam's flashlight flickered and went out, leaving him in complete darkness. The tunnel was quiet once more, but outside, the whispers began again, searching for their next visitor. The cycle would never end. The days passed, and no one heard from Sam again. The villagers searched the woods, but there was no sign of him. The whispers grew louder, carried on the wind, as if the tunnel had claimed another soul. His disappearance was just another mystery added to the growing legend of the forgotten tunnel. Some said they saw a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the forest, watching them from the distance. Others claimed to hear Sam's voice calling their name in the dead of night. Yet no one dared venture too close to the tunnel's forgotten entrance. The forest had become a place of fear, a place where even the bravest would not tread. In the heart of the village, the elders gathered to discuss the strange happenings. They knew the stories, and they knew the dangers of the tunnel. "It's not just a place," one elder said, his voice grave. "The tunnel is a doorway, and once it has chosen you, there is no escape." The elders had lived through the tales of those who vanished long ago, but now they were terrified. They warned the children and the young ones to stay far away from the woods. Yet despite their warnings, the pull of the forest continued to draw people in, as if the tunnel itself was calling them, one by one. One autumn evening, a man named Henry arrived in the village. He had heard whispers of the tunnel and the strange disappearances. Henry was a skeptic, believing the stories were mere superstition. But when he arrived, the village felt different. Its air was thick with unease. Despite the warnings, Henry couldn't resist. He was determined to uncover the truth. Armed with only his courage and a flashlight, he ventured into the woods. The moment he entered, the temperature dropped and the whispers began. They were faint at first, but soon they grew louder, clearer. "You've come to see," they whispered, "but you'll never leave." With a deep breath, Henry stepped inside. The tunnel stretched before him, an endless path of darkness. The stone in the distance glowed faintly, just like in the stories. As he walked, he felt an overwhelming sense of dread, but he couldn't stop. The whispers surrounded him, telling him secrets that made his heart race. "The tunnel never forgets," they murmured. "You will join us soon." Henry reached the glowing stone, but as he touched it, a cold wave of energy surged through his body. The whispers grew louder, and the shadows swirled around him. He looked around, and to his horror, he saw the figures of those who had disappeared before him: Sam, the stranger, and others whose names were forgotten. The stone's glow intensified, and Henry felt his body growing heavy, as if he were sinking into the earth. The whispers filled his mind, repeating the same chilling words. With one final breath, Henry disappeared into the darkness, his voice joining the whispers, forever trapped in the forgotten tunnel. Outside, the wind carried the faintest sound of a new whisper, waiting for the next soul to hear it and enter. The village was uneasy. Each day, the number of people who disappeared grew, and with each vanishing, the whispers seemed to grow stronger. The villagers spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting nervously whenever anyone mentioned the tunnel. Some tried to find out more about it, but every effort seemed to lead to dead ends. A young girl named Lily, whose brother had gone missing a year ago, decided she couldn't wait any longer. She had heard enough stories to understand that the tunnel was no ordinary place. With determination, she set out to find the truth, not caring about the warnings of the villagers. Lily had to know what had happened to her brother and what lay inside the tunnel. Lily ventured into the woods at dusk, knowing it was dangerous, but her love for her brother drove her forward. The trees seemed to close in around her as she walked, and the deeper she went, the more intense the whispers became. At first they were faint, like a breeze, but soon they were unmistakable, whispering her name. As she neared the familiar clearing, she saw at the entrance to the tunnel, glowing faintly in the dark. The cold air sent shivers down her spine, but Lily didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, feeling a pull she couldn't explain. The whispers grew louder, urging her to enter. "Come, find what you seek," they said. But Lily could already feel that the tunnel was no ordinary place, it was a prison, and she might never return. Lily took a deep breath and stepped into the tunnel, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The glow from the stone ahead was her only light, and the tunnel stretched on endlessly, winding and twisting as though it had no beginning or end. The air grew colder with every step she took, and the shadows around her seemed to move on their own, watching her with silent eyes. The whispers followed her, growing more desperate. "Turn back, Lily," they begged. "You are not meant to be here," but she pressed on, determined to find her brother and uncover the truth. As she walked deeper into the darkness, the whispers seemed to merge into a single, powerful voice that promised her what she sought if she could make it through. Lily finally reached the glowing stone, just like the stories had described. It was covered in ancient symbols, pulsing with energy, and she felt its pull like a magnet. The whispers were now deafening, swirling around her in a cacophony of voices. "You have found it," they chanted. "Now, you must choose." In front of her, a small pedestal stood, holding a rusted key. She had heard of this key, the one that unlocked the secret of the tunnel. Without thinking, Lily grabbed it, and the moment her fingers touched the metal, the entire tunnel seemed to shudder. The air thickened, and the whispers turned into frantic cries. "No, you should not have touched it," they screamed. As soon as Lily held the key, the tunnel began to change. The walls warped, and she was no longer sure of where she was. The whispers had stopped, replaced by a silence so heavy it felt suffocating. Before her, the shadows parted, revealing something that had been hidden for centuries. Rows upon rows of stone figures, each one frozen in time, their faces twisted in terror. Lily gasped as she recognized one of the figures, her brother. He stood motionless, his eyes wide open, filled with fear. The tunnel had claimed him, just as it had claimed so many others, and now it wanted her too. The key she held began to glow brighter, as if demanding her sacrifice. Suddenly, a voice spoke, not from the whispers, but from the very stone itself. "You have unlocked the final door, Lily. Now you will join them." The ground beneath her feet cracked, and the stone figures began to move. They reached out to her with cold hands, pulling her toward them. Lily screamed, but her voice was lost in the ever-growing roar of the whispers. The stone figures closed in, and in that moment Lily realized the truth: there was no escaping the tunnel. She had become part of its endless cycle, just another lost soul trapped in its dark embrace. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of whispers through the village, and once again, the tunnel waited for its next visitor. The cycle would continue, as it always had, drawing in those who were curious, those who sought answers, and those who could not resist the call. Lily's form slowly faded from view, and the tunnel once again fell into a deep, unsettling silence. Her sacrifice added her to the growing collection of souls trapped within its walls. Yet as the villagers slept, a new whisper echoed in the wind. It was a voice they hadn't heard before, strange, calm, and filled with an eerie peace. Somewhere deep in the forgotten woods, the whispers were changing. They were becoming clearer, more distinct. The voices of those who had vanished, like Lily and Sam, began to merge with one another, their stories blending together. The tunnel now held a new power, one that seemed to call out to anyone willing to listen, promising them the answers they so desperately sought. The village awoke the next morning to an unusual sight. A strange fog had settled over the forest, thick and dense, making it impossible to see beyond a few feet. The whispers grew louder, now impossible to ignore. They reached the ears of every villager, even the children. One by one, the villagers found themselves drawn toward the tunnel, their curiosity overpowering their fear. They couldn't explain why, but they felt compelled to follow the whispers, as if some unseen force was guiding them. Their steps led them into the woods, as the fog thickened around them, suffocating any sense of safety. By midday, a group of villagers had gathered near the entrance to the forgotten tunnel, their hearts racing with both fear and anticipation. They stood in silence, staring at the dark, gaping hole before them. The whispers echoed, now forming words that no one could ignore. "Enter, and you will know the truth," the voices promised. "Join those who have gone before, and you will be free." Though their minds screamed at them to turn back, their feet moved forward. The tunnel's pull was too strong, too irresistible, and as they crossed the threshold, they disappeared into the darkness, one by one. Inside the tunnel, the villagers were greeted by the sight of countless souls frozen in time, their eyes wide with fear. They were trapped in a loop, unable to escape, forever lost in the darkness. As the last villager entered, the stone figures began to stir once again, their arms reaching out toward the newcomers. The whispers filled the air, growing louder, more frantic. "You are ours now," they said. There is no escape. The entrance to the tunnel slowly began to close, its walls shifting as the souls within grew restless. The cycle was complete. The tunnel would remain open for a while, but it would soon fade again, waiting for the next soul who dared to seek its secrets. As the whispers died down, the fog lifted from the village, leaving behind an eerie calm. But the villagers were gone, lost to the tunnel forever. And somewhere deep in the woods, the whispers began once more, calling out to the next curious soul, promising answers and eternal darkness. Weeks passed, and the village was eerily quiet. No one dared to speak of the tunnel, and the forest was avoided by all. Yet, on certain nights, the fog would return, rolling in thick from the woods, and with it, the whispers. They grew louder, more insistent, as if calling out to those who had once ventured near. No one had seen the villagers since that day, but the air felt heavier, and the village seemed to be holding its breath. In the distance, the faint glow of the tunnel could still be seen flickering through the trees, as though it had a life of its own. The whispers now weren't just warnings, they were promises. "Return," they beckoned, "and you will know the truth." In the village, Lily's mother, a woman who had loved her daughter deeply, still searched for answers. Every night, she would stand at the edge of the woods, calling out for her lost child. But she never returned home, not realizing that her daughter's soul was now part of the tunnel. Lily's spirit wandered the dark corridors, searching for a way out, but there was no escape for her. In the deepest corners of the tunnel, Lily felt the weight of all the souls trapped with her. She could feel their sadness, their yearning to be free. But there was a connection she couldn't explain, a strange, binding force that made her a part of the place now, never able to fully leave. Her thoughts grew desperate. Could she find a way to warn others? Could she stop the cycle from continuing? One evening, a brave young man named Tom, who had heard the stories of the vanished villagers, decided that he would be the one to uncover the truth. His curiosity had always been stronger than his fear, and this time it was no different. He ventured into the woods, determined to find the tunnel and its secrets. As he walked, the whispers began to surround him, just like they had with the others. They were faint at first, but soon they grew louder, calling his name. "Tom," they whispered, "come closer. Enter, and you will see." The voices were both inviting and chilling, but Tom could not resist. He felt an unexplainable pull toward the tunnel, as if it were beckoning him home. Tom reached the entrance of the tunnel just as night fell. The fog hung thick in the air, and the darkness seemed to reach out and pull him in. He hesitated for a moment, but the whispers were too strong to ignore. He stepped forward into the darkness, his feet carrying him deeper into the forgotten tunnel. The walls of the tunnel seemed to close in around him, and soon he could no longer see his hand in front of his face. The whispers grew louder and more distinct, until they seemed to vibrate in his very bones. "You are almost there," they told him. "You will understand everything soon." Fear crept into his heart, but the curiosity that had led him here pushed him on. As Tom walked deeper, the air grew colder, and the whispers turned into frantic cries. They weren't just voices now, they were images, memories of those who had come before him. He saw flashes of their faces, Lily's, Sam's, the villagers. All of them had walked this path, seeking answers, only to be consumed by the tunnel. Tom suddenly felt the weight of the place pressing down on him, the overwhelming truth that this was no ordinary tunnel. It was alive, and it fed on the souls of those who dared to uncover its secrets. He stumbled forward, unable to stop, until he reached the heart of the tunnel, the stone pedestal glowing with an unnatural light. As he touched it, the whispers merged into one final voice, telling him what he feared the most: "You have become one of us now." Tom felt a surge of coldness as the stone beneath his fingers pulsed with energy. His body froze, unable to move, as the whispers wrapped around his mind. "You have awakened the truth," they hissed, their voices now a chorus of despair and anger. The tunnel, once silent, seemed alive with the force of their presence, the walls shaking as if reacting to the souls trapped within. For a moment, Tom could see it all, the faces of the villagers, their eyes wide in fear and longing. They were all there, trapped in the walls, their souls forever bound to the tunnel. It wasn't just the truth he had awakened, it was the curse that held them all captive. And now he was a part of it. There was no turning back. Suddenly, the tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly before him, a vast, dark expanse. The whispers faded, replaced by a haunting silence. Tom's heart raced in his chest as he realized the gravity of his situation. He had crossed a line there was no way to undo what he had just unleashed. The choice he had hoped to avoid now stood before him. He could either leave and allow the curse to claim more lives, or he could try to break it. The whispers returned, softer now but still present. "You can't escape us," they said, "but you can end it." One final sacrifice. Tom swallowed hard, his mind racing. What did they mean by sacrifice? Was it his life or something else? Was there a way to break the cycle, or was he doomed to join the others forever? Tom stood alone, pondering the weight of the decision before him. As he took a deep breath, the air seemed to grow thicker, heavier. He stepped forward, determined to break the curse that had consumed so many before him. But as he moved deeper into the heart of the tunnel, the walls closed in, and the whispers grew louder, more frantic. "Leave now, and the cycle will continue," they warned, "or stay, and you will free us all." Tom's hands trembled as he touched the stone pedestal once more. The tunnel around him seemed to spin, as if the very earth beneath him was shifting. The voices screamed in unison, pleading for him to make the choice. He realized then that his only way out was to let go of everything: his life, his memories, his very soul. With a final breath, Tom made the decision. He knelt before the stone, surrendering to the tunnel and its eternal curse. The moment he did, a bright light flashed, blinding him. The whispers stopped abruptly, leaving behind a deafening silence. For a brief moment, everything was still. Tom felt his body fade away, his essence merging with the spirits that had come before him. The tunnel seemed to exhale, its walls relaxing, as if the burden had been lifted. The souls of the lost villagers rose from the walls, their faces now peaceful. The curse was broken, but at a great cost. Tom had given up everything to set them free. And as the last of the whispers faded, the tunnel began to close, sealing its secrets once more. Back in the village, the fog slowly lifted, and the woods seemed less threatening. The villagers returned to their normal lives, unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded in the tunnel. But every now and then, when the moon was high and the wind was still, there would be a faint whisper on the breeze. It was the last of the lost souls, calling out for those who would remember their story. The tunnel was forgotten once again, its entrance sealed and hidden beneath the roots of the ancient trees. Yet in the silence of the night, if you listened closely, you could still hear the whispers, the voices of those who had sacrificed everything to end the curse. Their names were lost to time, but the story remained. And so, the cycle would one day begin again. The village had returned to its quiet routine, yet there was a strange stillness in the air. The trees no longer whispered, and the fog seemed to stay away. The villagers went about their daily lives, unaware of the tragic fate that had befallen the brave souls who had ventured into the tunnel. Life seemed almost too normal, too peaceful, as if the darkness that had once threatened them was nothing but a distant memory. But for Lily's mother, the pain of losing her daughter never left. She still wandered the woods at night, hoping for a sign that her child was still out there. On the darkest nights, she could hear the faintest whispers, but when she searched, she found nothing. The tunnel had sealed its secrets, and the village would never know the true price that had been paid to end the curse. Deep beneath the village, the forgotten tunnel remained untouched, its entrance now hidden from the world. Inside, the souls of the lost lingered, still trapped within the walls. Though the curse was broken, their pain had not ended. They could feel the world moving on, but they were still bound to the dark, cold stone that surrounded them. Somewhere within the tunnel, a figure moved, a shadow among shadows. It was Tom, or what was left of him. His body had faded, but his spirit remained, forever intertwined with the other lost souls. The whispers of the tunnel still called out to him, urging him to remember the sacrifice he had made. Though the tunnel had closed, its grip had not loosened, and its secrets would remain buried deep within its walls for all eternity. One night, long after the tunnel had been sealed, the fog began to return. It was thicker this time, creeping slowly toward the village like a living thing. The villagers felt an uneasy chill, but they tried to ignore it, continuing with their lives. However, there were those who began to hear the whispers once more. The voices were faint, like the soft echo of a forgotten memory, but they were growing louder, filling the air with an almost tangible presence. For some, the whispers were a warning urging them to stay away from the forest. For others, it was a call, as if the tunnel's thirst for souls had never truly been quenched. No one knew where the whispers came from, but there was a growing sense that something dark and restless had awakened once more. One evening, a curious traveler arrived in the village, unaware of the history that lingered just beyond the trees. He had heard stories of the forest, of the fog that haunted the woods, and of the whispers that had driven people mad. Intrigued, he ventured into the forest, determined to uncover the truth. As he walked deeper into the trees, the air grew colder and the fog thickened. The whispers began to surround him, soft at first, but gradually becoming clearer. "Follow us," they called, and you will see. The traveler hesitated, but the pull of the tunnel's mystery was too strong to resist. He found a hidden path, winding through the trees, leading him toward the forgotten entrance. The traveler reached the entrance of the tunnel just as night fell. The fog hung thick around him, and the whispers seemed to beckon him forward. He stepped inside, unaware of the danger that lay ahead. The tunnel was dark, its walls lined with the memories of the lost souls who had once walked its corridors. As he ventured deeper, the whispers grew louder, guiding him toward the heart of the tunnel. This time, the whispers were different. They were not just voices, they were the souls of those who had come before him, waiting to welcome him into their eternal prison. The traveler, consumed by the mystery, moved forward, unaware that he was about to become part of the very curse that had haunted the village for so long. As the last of the whispers filled his ears, the tunnel seemed to close around him, sealing him inside for all eternity. As the traveler stepped further into the tunnel, the air grew denser, almost suffocating. The whispers wrapped around him like tendrils, their voices becoming clearer, more insistent. "You belong to us now," they murmured, "just like the others before you." The traveler felt a cold shiver run down his spine. His heart raced as he realized the truth. He had walked into a trap, and there was no way back. His surroundings grew darker, the flickering light from his lantern barely cutting through the thick darkness. The walls seemed to close in on him, as if the tunnel itself was alive, breathing, shifting with each step he took. The whispers grew louder now, filling his mind, drowning out all other thoughts. He tried to turn back, but the path had disappeared, leaving only the endless blackened corridor ahead. In the heart of the tunnel, the traveler found himself surrounded by strange carvings etched into the stone walls. They depicted figures, some familiar, others terrifying, locked in eternal torment. The whispers intensified, as if they were the very souls of the beings trapped in these walls, desperately trying to communicate with him. "Help us," they begged, their voices a soft, desperate plea. "End the curse." The traveler's chest tightened as he realized the fate of those who had ventured here before him. They weren't just lost, they were prisoners, forever bound to the tunnel, unable to escape. He reached out to touch one of the carvings, feeling the cold stone beneath his fingers. As he did, the whispers surged, overwhelming him with a flood of emotions: fear, sorrow, regret. He could feel their pain, their longing for freedom. He knew now that to escape, he would have to face the same fate as they had. The traveler stood frozen, contemplating the whisper's words. Was there truly a way to end the curse? Or was he doomed to join the countless souls already trapped in this forsaken place? The tunnel seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as though it were waiting for him to make a decision. But what could he do? The choice was too great, the cost too high. As the voices grew louder, one voice stood out, a familiar voice. Don't listen to them, it warned. They want you to join them. But you can stop this. It was a voice he recognized from his past, a loved one he had lost. He turned, his breath catching in his throat. But there was no one there, only the endless darkness and the relentless whispers calling his name. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like a crushing force. With trembling hands, the traveler made his choice. He knew the cost of ending the curse. The tunnel could not be stopped, not without sacrifice. But he could not bear the thought of more souls suffering in the same way. He stepped toward the heart of the tunnel, where the stones seemed to hum with dark power. The whispers cried out in a mix of anger and desperation as they realized what he was about to do. In a single, shattering moment, the traveler reached into the center of the tunnel, pulling at the very heart of the curse. There was a deafening roar, a violent tremor that shook the earth itself. The walls cracked, and the ground beneath him split open. The whispers howled in fury as they were torn apart, their voices fading into nothingness. The curse was broken, but the tunnel began to collapse around him, the walls crumbling as the ancient power that had held it together unraveled. As the tunnel crumbled, the traveler felt himself pulled into the dark abyss, his body twisted and contorted, as if being torn between two worlds. The last thing he heard was the faintest whisper, no longer a chorus of voices, but a single, gentle sigh. "Thank you," it said. The tunnel was gone, consumed by the destruction he had caused in breaking the curse. The village above remained untouched, unaware of the sacrifice that had been made beneath their feet. The fog lifted, and the forest seemed to breathe once more, the eerie stillness replaced by the normal sounds of the night. But deep within the forgotten place, there was no longer a whispering voice, no longer any presence at all. The tunnel had become nothing more than a memory lost to time. And the traveler? He was gone, his soul forever entwined with the spirits he had set free. The village seemed different now. The fog, which had once clung to the trees like a curse, had disappeared completely. The skies were clear, and the air felt fresher than it had in years. The villagers went about their daily tasks, unaware of the darkness that had once haunted their land. For them, it was as if the strange happenings had never occurred. Life had returned to normal, and the stories of the cursed tunnel faded into myth. But there was still one person who remembered. Lily's mother stood at the edge of the forest, looking toward the place where the tunnel had once been. She could feel the change in the air, but there was no peace in her heart. She had never seen her daughter again. The whispers had stopped, but the emptiness of her loss remained. And deep inside, she wondered if the curse was truly broken, or if something darker still lingered beneath the earth. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a shadow moved through the woods. It was not a person, but something else, something ancient, its form barely visible beneath the trees. The forest had never been entirely quiet, but now there was a strange sense of watchfulness, as if the woods themselves were waiting for something to happen. The villagers had learned to avoid the forest after dark, but this figure moved without fear. It was as if it had been drawn to the very heart of the land, to the place where the tunnel had once been. The shadows stretched longer, and the forest seemed to breathe around it. The figure paused, its gaze turning toward the spot where the tunnel had been, a cold whisper running through the leaves. Days passed, and the strange figure continued to appear in the forest. The villagers had started to talk again, but this time their whispers were filled with unease. The figure seemed to come and go, never staying for long, but always returning to the same place. The air around it grew heavier, colder, as if it were drawing something from the earth itself. Lily's mother, haunted by the memories of her daughter's disappearance, decided to venture into the woods once more. She was desperate for closure, for a sign that her child had not been forgotten. Armed with only a lantern, she walked into the darkened forest, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she was walking into the unknown, but something told her she had to try. Deep in the forest, Lily's mother reached the place where the tunnel had once been. There was nothing left, just an empty space, the ground bare and cold. Yet, the feeling of something ancient and powerful lingered in the air. She knelt down, placing her hand on the ground, feeling the vibrations beneath her fingers. Suddenly, a low whisper echoed through the trees, the voice familiar yet distant. "You are not alone," it said. "The tunnel is not gone," Lily's mother gasped, her breath catching in her throat. The voice sounded like her daughter's, but it was twisted, as if something dark had overtaken it. She looked around but saw nothing, only the trees and the shadows. The whispers grew louder, urging her to listen, to understand. As the whispers filled her mind, Lily's mother realized the truth: the tunnel had never truly been destroyed. It had only been hidden, buried deep within the earth, its presence lingering in the very air. The souls trapped within had not been freed, they had simply been waiting for the right moment to rise again. With trembling hands, she stepped back, her heart heavy with the realization that the darkness was far from over. The village was safe for now, but the curse would never be fully broken. The tunnel still held its grip on the land, and the whispers would continue, growing louder with each passing day. The souls trapped within were not at rest, and neither would she be. For she knew the truth. Now the forgotten tunnel would one day return, and when it did, it would claim more than just the lost souls of the past. The forest was silent once more, but it was a silence that weighed heavily on Lily's mother. She could feel the air pressing down on her, thick with an unspoken dread. The ground beneath her feet seemed to pulse, as if the earth itself was alive, waiting. She turned and walked away from the empty spot where the tunnel had once been, her mind racing with the terrifying truth. As she reached the edge of the forest, the whispering voices began again, soft at first, but growing louder with each step she took. They called her name, beckoning her back into the woods, back to the heart of the curse. The cold breath of the wind sent chills down her spine, and she couldn't help but feel that the darkness was following her, creeping just behind, waiting for the right moment to strike. Night fell quickly, the sky turning black as the stars hid behind the clouds. Lily's mother could not shake the feeling that something was watching her from the shadows. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig seemed to come from just beyond her sight. She tried to ignore it, to convince herself it was nothing, but deep down, she knew the forest held more secrets than she had ever imagined. She decided to return to her home, but the whispers grew more urgent, more insistent. They were no longer just a soft murmur, but a cry for help. "Come back," they pleaded. "We need you." The voice sounded like Lily's again, but there was something wrong with it, distorted, as if the tunnel had taken her soul and twisted it. Her heart pounded in her chest, and a cold sweat dripped down her neck. The watcher in the dark was drawing closer. The next morning, the village woke to a strange sight. A thick fog had rolled in overnight, blanketing the entire area in a shroud of mist. The trees in the forest seemed to loom taller, their shadows darker, and the air smelled faintly of earth and decay. People whispered about the strange happenings, but no one dared venture into the woods. Lily's mother could not escape the feeling that something had awakened. The whispers had followed her home, echoing through the walls of her house. She knew the tunnel was not truly gone, and neither were the spirits trapped within. They had returned, and they were restless, seeking to reclaim what they had lost. She sat in her room, staring at the empty space where the tunnel once lay, wondering if she was the only one who could stop it. Lily's mother knew what she had to do. The whispers had told her she was the key, that only she could break the cycle, once and for all. But she had to go back to the tunnel, to the heart of the curse. The villagers had no idea what had truly happened, and she could not bear to see them fall victim to the darkness once more. The next morning, the village woke to a strange sight. A thick fog had rolled in overnight, blanketing the entire area in a shroud of mist. The trees in the forest seemed to loom taller, their shadows darker, and the air smelled faintly of earth and decay. People whispered about the strange happenings, but no one dared venture into the woods. Lily's mother could not escape the feeling that something had awakened. The whispers had followed her home, echoing through the walls of her house. She knew the tunnel was not truly gone, and neither were the spirits trapped within. They had returned, and they were restless, seeking to reclaim what they had lost. She sat in her room, staring at the empty space where the tunnel once lay, wondering if she was the only one who could stop it. Lily's mother knew what she had to do. The whispers had told her she was the key, that only she could break the cycle once and for all. But she had to go back to the tunnel, to the heart of the curse. The villagers had no idea what had truly happened, and she could not bear to see them fall victim to the darkness once more. She gathered the few belongings she thought might help: candles, herbs, and an old book she had found among her daughter's things. The pages were filled with strange symbols and rituals, warnings and stories of those who had tried to end the curse before. She stepped into the woods once more, determined to face whatever waited for her in the darkness. The tunnel was still there, hidden beneath the earth, waiting. Lily's mother could feel it before she even saw it, an oppressive, malevolent force that hung in the air. The whispers were louder now, filling her mind with terrifying visions of the souls trapped in eternal torment. They pleaded for release, but there was no way out unless she made the ultimate sacrifice. Lily's mother knew she had no choice. She stepped forward, her heart heavy with the knowledge that to break the curse, she would have to offer herself as the final offering to the tunnel's dark power. As she recited the incantations from the old book, the ground trembled, and the tunnel began to open once more. The whispers grew louder, reaching a fever pitch as the darkness rose to claim her. With a final, trembling breath, she closed her eyes and let go, knowing that her sacrifice would be the only way to set the spirits free. As Lily's mother made her sacrifice, the earth trembled beneath her. The tunnel seemed to come alive, its dark presence growing stronger with every word she uttered. The air grew colder, and the whispers began to fade, slowly replaced by an eerie silence. But as the ground quaked, Lily's mother realized that something had changed. The darkness she had been willing to release now seemed to be pulling her in, as if it wanted her soul for its own. Her body grew heavy, as though the weight of the curse was too much to bear. She could feel the life draining from her, her heart struggling to keep up with the darkness closing in. But despite the overwhelming fear, There was a strange peace in knowing she had done everything she could to save the village from the endless cycle of torment. She closed her eyes, ready to face whatever was to come, knowing her soul was now bound to the tunnel forever. Back in the village, the fog that had covered the land began to lift, but the villagers felt a strange emptiness in the air. It was as if something had been removed, leaving behind only a hollow silence. No one knew what had truly happened in the forest, and none of them dared to ask. Life returned to a sense of normalcy, but a subtle unease remained in their hearts. The curse, it seemed, had finally ended. Yet deep beneath the earth, the Forgotten Ones stirred. The spirits trapped in the tunnel had been freed, but not in the way they had hoped. They had been released from their eternal prison, only to find themselves in a new, unfamiliar world. Their faces were now pale, their eyes lifeless, as they wandered in search of something they could not find. They had been forgotten by time, but now they were free, wandering in the void left by the curse. As the days passed, Lily's mother's absence was felt by everyone. The villagers remembered her as a loving, devoted woman who had given everything for her family. But as time wore on, the memory of her began to fade, just like the whispers that had once haunted the land. People went on with their lives, unaware that the darkness was still watching, still waiting. One evening, a young boy ventured into the woods, curious about the stories he had heard. He had heard whispers from the village elders, warning him not to go near the tunnel. But he didn't listen. The lure of adventure was too strong. As he walked deeper into the forest, the air grew thick, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer. The further he went, the louder the whispers became, calling him toward the tunnel's entrance. The boy finally arrived at the entrance of the forgotten tunnel, its mouth wide and dark, as if waiting for him. The ground beneath his feet seemed to pulse with an ancient power, and the whispers grew louder, urging him to step inside. He hesitated, his body trembling with fear, but something inside him pushed him forward. As he crossed the threshold, the darkness wrapped around him like a cold, suffocating blanket. The whispers grew frantic, filling his mind with visions of the spirits that had once been trapped here. They were angry, desperate to be free, and they sought the boy to complete the cycle that had been interrupted so many years ago. He felt their cold fingers brush his skin, and in that moment he understood the terrible truth: he had become the next soul to be claimed. The boy's scream echoed through the tunnel as the darkness consumed him, pulling him deeper into the earth. His body twisted and contorted as the spirits took hold of him, using him to fulfill their unending thirst for vengeance. The whispers reached a deafening crescendo, and the tunnel seemed to come alive once more, its grip tightening around the land. The curse was not over. Outside, the village remained unaware of the boy's fate. Life continued, but there was a creeping sense of dread that had settled back into the land. The curse had not been broken. It had only been delayed. The whispers were still here, still waiting for the next soul to fall into their grasp. The forgotten tunnel, buried deep within the earth, would never truly rest, and neither would the spirits trapped within. They would continue to haunt the land, forever seeking more souls to claim. The village remained quiet, but its peace was fragile. The boy was never seen again, and soon other villagers began to disappear as well. The forest remained untouched, its secrets hidden from the world, but the whispers would not be silenced. They could still be heard, faintly, in the wind that rustled through the trees. The forgotten tunnel had claimed yet another soul, and it was only a matter of time before it would call again. The curse was not over, nor would it ever be. As the years passed, The villagers forgot the story, but the land did not. It remembered, always. And deep beneath the earth, the tunnel waited, its whispers calling to those brave or foolish enough to listen. It had been years since the village had heard the whispers, and the tunnel remained buried deep within the earth, forgotten by most. But one autumn evening, a lone traveler arrived, drawn to the stories he had heard about the cursed woods. His name was Elias, and he had come in search of adventure, not knowing the true history of the place he had chosen to explore. Elias walked into the village, unaware of the dark past that hung over it. The people greeted him cautiously, their eyes filled with a strange, unspoken warning. They spoke in hushed tones, telling him to avoid the forest, but their warnings only fueled his curiosity. He didn't believe in superstitions and thought the village was just afraid of a tale long forgotten. As night fell, he ventured toward the woods, unknowingly stepping into the path that had claimed many before him. The trees loomed tall and dark as Elias ventured deeper into the forest, their branches swaying like twisted hands reaching out to grab him. The further he walked, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. A cold breeze stirred the leaves, and the air grew thick with the scent of damp earth. Elias was not afraid. He had faced danger in his travels before, but something about this place felt different. It was as if the very forest itself was watching him. Suddenly he heard it, the faintest sound, a whisper carried on the wind. His heart raced, but he pushed on, dismissing it as the rustling of the leaves. But as he walked deeper, the whispering grew louder, more urgent, as if something was calling his name. He stopped, looking around, but saw nothing. The eyes of the forest, he felt, were upon him, hidden just beyond his sight, waiting for him to make his move. Elias continued his journey, the whispers growing louder and more persistent with each step he took. It was as if the very ground beneath him was alive, pulling him forward. Soon, he found himself standing at the mouth of a dark tunnel, hidden beneath the roots of a massive tree. The air around it felt thick and heavy, as though it had been untouched for centuries. The whispers came from within, beckoning him inside. They were clearer now, and they sounded like pleading voices desperate for release. Elias hesitated, his instincts telling him to turn back. But the lure of the unknown was too strong. He stepped forward, entering the tunnel with a sense of both fear and excitement. As he moved deeper into the darkness, the whispers seemed to surround him, echoing off the walls, growing louder with every step. The further Elias ventured into the tunnel, the more he felt the weight of the darkness pressing in around him. The air grew colder, and the once soft whispers became angry cries, as though the tunnel itself was alive and angry at his intrusion. His heart raced as he realized the path he had chosen was not one of exploration but of entrapment. Suddenly the tunnel began to shift. The walls seemed to close in on him, and the ground beneath his feet trembled. Elias tried to turn back, but it was too late. The tunnel had changed, and now he was trapped. Panic surged through him as he ran, his footsteps echoing in the suffocating darkness. The whispers were no longer distant but right behind him, chasing him, urging him to go deeper, to surrender to the curse. He knew he had made a terrible mistake. Elias stumbled in the darkness, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening now, as if they were right in his ear. The tunnel seemed endless, stretching out before him like a maze, with no escape in sight. As his fear mounted, he began to hear another sound, the sound of something moving, something following him. Turning quickly, he saw nothing but shadows, but the presence was unmistakable. The air grew colder, and a figure began to take shape from the darkness, a shadowy form with hollow eyes and a twisted grin. It reached out to him, its fingers long and bony, like a hand from the grave. Elias realized with horror that he had awakened the soul collector, the entity that had been trapping souls for centuries in the forgotten tunnel. He tried to scream, but no sound escaped his lips as the creature's grip tightened around him. In the blink of an eye, Elias was pulled into the darkness, his body no longer his own. The last thing he heard was the whisper of the souls trapped within the tunnel, their voices calling out to him, their stories now his own. His soul was now bound to the tunnel, joining the others who had fallen before him. The whispering grew louder, the voices melding into one, an eternal chorus of torment. The tunnel, though forgotten by the outside world, was alive. It would never be abandoned. It had a hunger that could never be satisfied, and those who entered its depths would never return. As Elias became another voice in the eternal whisper, the forest above remained silent, its secrets buried beneath the earth, waiting for the next soul to wander too close. The village above continued with its quiet, everyday life, unaware of the fate that had befallen Elias. Time passed, but the whispering in the forgotten tunnel never ceased. It called to the new generations, a warning ignored by those who had grown too curious. The tunnel was now more than a memory, it was a presence, an eternal force that could not be easily dismissed. Yet, in the midst of life, a young woman named Clara arrived in the village. She had heard whispers of strange occurrences in the nearby woods and tunnel. She was not one to believe in old superstitions, but the stories intrigued her. Clara had lost someone dear to her many years ago, a brother who had vanished while traveling. Desperate for answers, she believed the tunnel might hold the key to finding him. With little hesitation, she set off toward the woods, unaware of the danger that lay ahead. Clara walked with a sense of determination as she ventured into the forest. The air was thick, and the trees stood tall like silent sentinels, casting long shadows that seemed to follow her every step. Despite the village's warnings, Clara pressed on, convinced that she could handle whatever might come her way. As she walked deeper into the woods, she heard the faintest whisper, so soft it was almost imperceptible. The sound made her stop in her tracks, her heart pounding with both fear and excitement. It was a voice familiar, calling her name. She hesitated but then moved forward, convinced that it was a sign. The whispers grew louder as she approached the tunnel, and Clara's curiosity began to overcome her caution. The tunnel came into view, its dark mouth opening like a gaping wound in the earth. Clara could feel the cold air drifting out from within, an unsettling sensation that chilled her bones. The voices she had heard earlier seemed to be coming from deep inside, echoing through the tunnel. She stood at the entrance, hesitating, knowing this could be the last place her brother had been seen. Taking a deep breath, Clara stepped forward, entering the tunnel. The darkness enveloped her, swallowing the light from the outside world. The walls of the tunnel seemed to close in around her as she walked deeper into its depths. The whispers grew louder, now distinctly multiple voices, crying out from the shadows. Clara tried to ignore the unease building in her chest, pressing forward in search of the truth. As Clara ventured deeper into the tunnel, the temperature dropped and the oppressive darkness grew heavier. The whispers were now impossible to ignore. They were not just voices, but a feeling, an overwhelming presence that clung to her like a cold, damp cloth. With every step, the whispers seemed to draw closer, growing in number and intensity. Clara began to feel something strange stirring within her, as if the tunnel was alive, reacting to her presence. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was no longer alone. The walls around her seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. The whispers started to form words, fragments of sentences that sent chills down her spine. "Turn back," they pleaded. "Leave this place," but Clara refused to listen. She had to find her brother, no matter the cost. Suddenly, Clara stumbled, her foot catching on something hidden beneath the dirt. As she bent down to investigate, she uncovered an old, rotting piece of cloth. It was familiar, her brother's jacket. The realization hit her like a cold wave. He had been here, lost to the same fate that had taken so many others. The whispers became louder, almost frantic now, as if they were aware of her discovery. A strange light flickered in the distance, casting an eerie glow on the tunnel walls. Clara's heart raced, and she followed the light, desperate for answers. As she moved toward it, she found herself standing in a large chamber. The walls were covered with names scratched into the stone, names of those who had entered and never returned. Her brother's name was among them. It was then that she understood. The tunnel did not just trap the body, it captured the soul. Her brother was now a part of the whispers, his voice lost to the abyss. Clara's heart pounded in her chest as she realized the full extent of the curse. The tunnel was not just a place of death, it was a prison for the souls of the lost, forever trapped in the darkness. She turned to leave, but the way out was no longer clear. The tunnel seemed to have changed, shifting in the darkness, as if it were alive and protecting its secrets. The whispers grew louder, now mixed with the desperate cries of the trapped souls. Clara could feel the cold fingers of the tunnel reach out to her, pulling her into its depths. She fought to stay calm, but the presence around her was overwhelming. As she took a step back, she felt something brush against her, something cold, something that whispered her name in a voice she recognized. It was her brother's voice, calling to her, urging her to stay. But Clara knew, deep in her heart, that if she stayed, she would never leave. Clara's heart raced as the whispering voices swirled around her, becoming louder and more insistent. The air was thick with the presence of the trapped souls, their restless energy pressing against her from every side. She could feel their desperate desire to escape, to pull her deeper into the tunnel with them. Her body trembled as she fought the urge to succumb to their call. With every step she took toward the entrance, the tunnel seemed to stretch, its dark walls closing in on her, as if it didn't want her to leave. The coldness intensified, wrapping around her like an icy grip. Clara refused to stop, her legs aching with every movement, but she knew she couldn't let herself fall victim to the tunnel's curse. Her brother's voice echoed in her ears, but this time it was different, weak and desperate. She had to get out for both of their sakes. Just as Clara thought she was near the exit, she saw something, a faint light flickering in the distance. It wasn't the natural light from the outside world, but something strange, pulsing from within the very walls of the tunnel. The whispers grew silent for a moment, as if they were waiting, watching her every move. The light was beckoning her. Clara knew that this was not a sign of hope, but rather a lure to draw her back into the tunnel's depths. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as she stepped closer to the light, her instincts screaming at her to turn around. But it was too late. The tunnel had already claimed her. A dark, shadowy figure appeared in the light, its form twisted and distorted. Clara couldn't make out its features, but she could feel its malevolent presence. It was the guardian of the tunnel. the force that kept the trapped souls bound to its darkness. The figure advanced toward Clara, its movements slow and deliberate. The cold air grew colder still, as if the very essence of the tunnel was draining her strength. Clara tried to step back, but the tunnel seemed to push her forward, guiding her into the figure's path. Her heart pounded louder in her chest as she realized that she had no way to escape. The figure's face became clearer, and Clara gasped as she saw the twisted, agonized expression of a person her brother's face. But it wasn't him. The creature was a shadow of what had once been human, its eyes hollow and filled with endless despair. "You cannot leave," it whispered, its voice a chilling echo of her brother's. "You are part of the tunnel now, just as I am." "We all are." Clara took a step back, her eyes wide with terror. The figure reached out, its skeletal hand brushing against her skin, and she felt a wave of icy dread wash over her. She could feel her soul being tugged toward the darkness, her body growing heavy, as though the weight of the tunnel itself was dragging her down. The promise she had made to find her brother was fading, slipping through her fingers like sand. With every ounce of strength she had left, Clara tore herself from the figure's grasp, backing away slowly. Her heart ached for her brother, but she knew that she couldn't stay here any longer. She could feel herself fading, her connection to the living world weakening. The figure's voice echoed in her mind. "You cannot escape. You will join us forever." Clara's legs gave way beneath her as she collapsed onto the cold stone floor. The whispering voices began again, growing louder with each passing second. The souls of the lost once trapped in the tunnel now reached out to her, their invisible hands pulling her toward the depths. She could feel their pain, their endless longing to be freed from the prison they had been trapped in for so long. But Clara could not help them. She could barely save herself. The tunnel seemed to be closing in on her, its walls shifting and expanding like a living entity. Clara could see nothing but darkness, the light at the entrance now a distant memory. She knew she had no choice but to surrender, to allow the tunnel to claim her. Her brother's voice called out one last time, but this time it was different. It was full of peace. "It's too late for me," he whispered. "But you can still escape. Run." Clara's eyes opened wide in horror as she realized what her brother meant. The tunnel wasn't just a prison, it was a grave, and its power had already claimed her. The souls that had vanished over the years were now part of the tunnel, their whispers forever echoing through the darkness. She could hear their voices, feel their anguish, and it was too much to bear. With one final surge of willpower, Clara turned and ran. The tunnel fought against her, pulling her back with every step, but Clara pushed on. The whispers became screams, the voices of the lost souls crying out in desperation as they reached for her. But Clara's strength began to fade, her body growing weaker with each passing second. She knew that the tunnel would not let her go easily, but as she reached the entrance, she saw a faint light in the distance. It was her only hope, the light that would lead her out of the darkness. Clara stumbled toward the light, her legs shaking with exhaustion, but the pull of the tunnel was still strong. It seemed to stretch, trying to keep her in its grasp, its cold, dark walls closing in. The whispering voices, now frantic and furious, screamed in her ears, urging her to stop, to turn around. But Clara could feel the light growing brighter with every step, and she knew that it was the only thing standing between her and eternal darkness. She reached out, her hands trembling, and touched the edge of the light. Instantly, a warm wave of energy washed over her, filling her body with strength. The tunnel's grip began to loosen, and the darkness around her seemed to recede. Clara could see her brother's face one last time, his expression a mix of sorrow and hope. He nodded at her, a silent message, and then his image faded into the light. She had to keep moving, for herself and for him. With renewed strength, Clara pushed forward, her heart pounding with every step. The whispers grew weaker, as if the tunnel itself was finally beginning to give way. The light at the end of the tunnel beckoned her like a distant promise, and the shadows seemed to retreat, their power no longer strong enough to hold her. Clara knew that she was close to freedom, but she could still feel the tunnel's lingering presence, trying to drag her back into its depths. As she neared the entrance, the last of the darkness seemed to crumble around her. The voices, once deafening, faded into nothingness. The tunnel's cold grip vanished, leaving Clara breathless but free. She took one last look behind her, the memories of the whispers and the figure of her brother now fading into the distance. The tunnel had lost its power, and she had escaped. Clara emerged from the tunnel into the daylight, her body weak but her spirit free. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a soft glow over the landscape. The air felt different, lighter, fresher, as if the weight of the tunnel had been lifted from her shoulders. She collapsed onto the ground, overwhelmed with emotion, tears streaming down her face. She was free, but the journey had taken its toll. As Clara lay there, breathing in the fresh air, she realized that the tunnel would never truly leave her. The whispers, the shadowy figure, the sense of dread, those things would stay with her forever. But she had made it out. She had broken free. And that was a victory she would hold on to for the rest of her life. Days passed since Clara's escape, and life slowly returned to normal. The memories of the tunnel still haunted her, creeping into her dreams, but she no longer feared it. The whispers were quiet now, and the weight of the darkness had lifted. Clara knew that she had been changed by her experience, but she was determined to live her life fully, to honor her brother's memory by embracing the world she had fought so hard to return to. She visited the tunnel once more, standing at its entrance. The darkness no longer called to her. It was a part of her past, a chapter she had survived, but it would not define her. Clara smiled softly, knowing that she had overcome the most terrifying of trials, and she was stronger because of it. As Clara walked away from the tunnel for the final time, she made a promise to herself. She would never let the shadows of the past control her. The voices might still echo in her mind from time to time, but they would no longer hold power over her. She would live in the light, in the world of the living, and embrace every moment of it. The memory of her brother would always remain in her heart, but she now understood the most important lesson of all, that even in the darkest of places, there is always a way out, and she had found it. Clara was free, and she would make the most of her second chance. As Clara walked away from the forgotten tunnel, she felt the last remnants of its darkness slip away. But just before she reached the safety of the world beyond, a soft whisper tickled her ear. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but she heard it clearly. "You are not alone." Clara froze, her heart racing, but she smiled softly. She knew that she would never truly be alone. The whispers of the forgotten tunnel might have faded, but they had left behind a legacy, a reminder that even in the darkest of places, light can always be found. And sometimes it's the whispers that guide you toward it. Clara sat on the grassy hill, her thoughts drifting as the wind rustled the leaves around her. The world felt peaceful now, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something still lingered in the air. The whispers, though gone from the tunnel, seemed to echo in her mind, quiet but persistent. She closed her eyes, trying to focus on the sound of the birds, the rustling trees, but the silence felt different now, haunted. The weight of her past experiences hung in the air like an invisible fog. She could feel her heart beat steadily, but every now and then the silence would break, and for just a moment, Clara thought she heard the faintest whisper. She would shake her head and dismiss it. But deep down, she knew that the tunnel's whispers were far from over. As Clara stood up and began walking, the sense of being watched returned. Her skin prickled, and she glanced around, but there was no one in sight. The hilltop was empty, and the world around her was calm, yet a shadow seemed to linger at the edge of her vision. The feeling was subtle, but it gnawed at her, pulling her attention to the woods nearby. The familiar unease gripped her heart as she took a cautious step forward. Her instincts told her to leave, but curiosity got the better of her. She moved towards the edge of the forest, her footsteps soft on the earth. The whispers in her mind intensified, but she still couldn't understand them. They were growing louder, coming from deep within the trees. Clara had no choice but to continue. The path before her seemed to open up, as if inviting her to uncover what lay hidden within. The deeper Clara ventured into the forest, the stronger the whispers became. They no longer felt like a distant memory, they felt real, as if they were right behind her, following her every move. Her breath quickened, and her heart pounded in her chest. There, among the trees, she felt a presence, something watching her from the shadows. Her feet moved faster, but it seemed as if the trees closed in around her, guiding her in one direction. Suddenly, a voice broke through the murmurs, a voice Clara had not heard in years. It was faint at first, but unmistakable. It was her brother. She froze, the hairs on her neck standing up. His voice was low, almost sorrowful, but there was a strange echo to it. "Clara." I'm here. The voice faded as quickly as it had come, but it left a chilling feeling in her bones. She couldn't help but follow the voice, drawn to its call. Clara stumbled through the trees, her mind racing with confusion and fear. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly, the path ahead winding and unclear. Yet she was drawn forward, as if the very air around her was alive with energy. The whispers from the tunnel had returned, louder and clearer, but this time they felt different. They weren't trying to stop her. They were guiding her. She pushed through the last few branches and suddenly found herself in a clearing. The light from the setting sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the ground. In the center of the clearing stood an old stone well, its edges covered in moss and vines. Clara's heart skipped a beat. This was the place from her dreams, the place where the whispers had begun. She stepped closer, her breath caught in her throat. Clara knelt beside the well, her hands trembling as she touched the cold stone. The whispers grew louder, filling her mind with fragmented memories. She could hear her brother's voice again, clearer this time. "Clara, find the truth," he was pleading, desperate. The well felt like it was calling to her, and despite every instinct telling her to run, she knew she had to look inside. Slowly, she leaned over the edge, peering into the darkness below. The shadows in the well seemed to move, swirling like smoke. Clara's heart raced as she saw something shift beneath the surface. A figure began to rise, its form indistinct but familiar. The whispers grew louder, now frantic. Clara gasped as the figure reached out, and for the first time she realized that the tunnel and the whispers had been a warning. This was the true danger, the thing that had been waiting all along. The figure in the well slowly emerged, revealing itself to be a reflection of Clara's own face. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stared into the eyes of the figure, eyes that were filled with sorrow and a sense of foreboding. The whispers grew louder, now a chorus of voices that spoke in unison. "You cannot escape." Clara tried to back away, but the ground beneath her feet began to shift, pulling her closer to the well. Panic surged through her as she struggled to break free, but it was no use. The cycle had begun again. The tunnel, the whispers, the darkness, it was all a part of her fate, an endless loop. And now she was trapped. The well's darkness swallowed her whole, pulling her back into its depths, and the whispers echoed in her ears as everything went black. Clara's vision was blurry as she opened her eyes. The world around her was dark, silent, and cold. For a moment, she thought she was back in the forgotten tunnel. But this was different. The air was thick, and the ground beneath her was damp and uneven. She could hear faint whispers, but they weren't clear. The faces of those she loved, her brother, her parents, flashed through her mind, their voices lost in the darkness. The echoes of the tunnel still haunted her, but now there was something else, something that felt even more sinister. The whispers weren't just calling her, they were surrounding her, getting closer. As the dark entity reached out toward her, Clara could feel its presence wrapping around her, cold and suffocating. The whispers in her mind grew louder until they sounded like a roar in her ears. And then, just as she thought she would be lost forever, a familiar voice broke through the chaos. It was her brother's voice again, but this time it was clear and urgent. "Clara, listen." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She looked around, desperately searching for the source of the voice. The tunnel was never the danger, her brother continued, his voice full of pain. "The real threat is what you carry inside." The darkness seemed to retreat slightly as Clara tried to understand. What did he mean? What was she carrying inside? The air around her felt thick with an unspoken truth. Suddenly, the figure in the shadows stopped, its glowing eyes narrowing as if it was aware of the change. Clara felt a strange pull deep inside her chest, like something was awakening. The ground beneath her trembled, and the whispers ceased for a brief moment, leaving only a deafening silence. Then, the entity spoke in a voice that sent chills down her spine. "You cannot hide from what you are." Clara's thoughts spun. She had always thought the tunnel, the whispers, and the darkness were external forces, but now she understood that they were tied to her own fears, her own guilt. The entity wasn't just a creature from the depths, it was a reflection of the darkness inside her. The weight of her past, the things she had never dealt with, was manifesting before her. The whispers were not from the tunnel, they were from within her, echoing the unresolved pain she had been hiding for years. Clara dropped to her knees, overwhelmed by the realization. The darkness had never been outside of her, it had always been within, waiting to consume her. She could feel it now, twisting in her chest, pulling her down. But something deep inside her refused to give in. She stood up, her legs unsteady, but her resolve hardening. The whispers, the entity, the darkness, they had been tormenting her for too long. It was time to face it. The air crackled with energy as Clara took a step toward the entity. She didn't know how, but she knew she had to fight. "I won't be controlled by you," she whispered, her voice trembling but determined. The entity paused, its glowing eyes watching her closely. For the first time, Clara saw fear in its gaze, It was afraid. It knew she had found the strength to confront the darkness. The darkness recoiled, its form shifting, growing larger, angrier. Clara's heart raced as she felt the pull of the shadows around her. She could hear the whispers again, now full of rage, trying to drown out her thoughts. But Clara held her ground, focusing on the light that flickered within her heart. "I am not you," she said, her voice stronger now. The whispers faltered as her inner light grew brighter, shining through the darkness. With a final, resounding cry, Clara reached out, summoning the light within her to push back the shadows. The entity shrieked, its form unraveling, fading into nothingness. The whispers faded, and Clara stood alone in the quiet. The weight of the darkness lifted. She had won. The tunnel, the whispers, the terror, it was all over. For the first time in years, Clara felt peace. The battle within her had been won. Clara stood in the now empty space, the echoes of the past fading away. The air felt lighter, and the darkness had been completely erased. For the first time in what felt like forever, Clara could breathe without feeling the weight of fear pressing down on her chest. The tunnel, the shadows, the whispers, they were all gone. A strange sense of freedom washed over her. She turned around and saw the tunnel entrance, the place that had once been her prison. Now it felt like a distant memory. As Clara stepped out into the fresh air, she closed her eyes, letting the sunlight warm her face. She could hear birds chirping in the distance. The world was peaceful once again. But the journey wasn't over. Clara knew that healing took time. The battle inside her had ended, but the true test would be facing the world outside. She wasn't alone anymore, though. She had learned to face her inner darkness, and now she would face whatever came next with the strength she had gained. The weeks that followed were not easy, but they were full of promise. Clara had to rebuild herself, piece by piece. Every day she faced her fears and memories, but this time she did so with courage. She sought help from those who cared about her, and together they worked to heal the wounds that had been festering inside her for so long. Her brother's voice still echoed in her mind, but now it brought comfort rather than fear. He had shown her the path to peace, even from beyond the darkness. The whispers which had once tormented her were now soft reminders of the strength it took to overcome them. Clara knew she would never forget the tunnel, but it no longer held any power over her. She had learned to face her past and leave it behind. One evening, as Clara walked through the woods near her home, she felt a shift within herself. The shadows that once clung to her were gone, replaced by a sense of clarity and peace. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over everything, and for the first time in a long while, Clara felt truly at peace. As she walked along the path, she realized that the tunnel had been more than just a physical place. It had been a manifestation of her inner struggles, her fears, and her unresolved pain. Now, as she faced the world with new eyes, she felt empowered. She was no longer controlled by the darkness. The road ahead was uncertain, but she no longer feared it. Clara was ready for whatever came next. Clara continued her journey toward healing, but this time she did so with the understanding that strength doesn't come from avoiding pain, but from embracing it and learning from it. The whispers, though distant now, were still a part of her past, but they no longer had control. She had learned to listen to the quiet voice of strength inside her, and it guided her every step. One evening, Clara stood by the same tunnel entrance where her journey had begun. The air was still, the ground beneath her feet solid. But it was no longer the entrance to fear, it was simply the beginning of a new chapter. She had faced the darkness and emerged stronger than ever. Clara knew now that the true light was within her, and nothing would ever take that away. As time passed, Clara's life began to take on a new rhythm. She found peace in the simple things: a walk through the woods, a quiet evening at home, the laughter of friends and family. She had learned that true healing comes from within, and it was a process, not a destination. The whispers were gone, but the lessons they had taught her remained. One evening, as Clara sat by the window watching the sunset, she smiled. She thought of the tunnel, of the darkness, and of the strength she had found. The journey had been long, but it had taught her more than she could have ever imagined. Clara had faced her fears, and in doing so she had found her true self. Clara's life had changed in ways she never thought possible. The whispers, the tunnel, the fear, they were now memories, faded and powerless. She had learned to trust herself, to trust the light within. The future no longer seemed uncertain, for Clara knew that no matter what came next, she was strong enough to face it. As she stepped into the future, Clara held on to the lessons she had learned. The darkness may have once tried to consume her, but now she carried the light with her, always. And as long as she remembered that, nothing could ever truly harm her again. Clara had come a long way since that dark tunnel. She was no longer the person who feared the shadows or listened to the haunting whispers. She had found peace in her heart and strength in her soul. The road to healing had not been easy, but it had been worth it. Now, Clara walked through life with confidence, no longer burdened by the weight of the past. The darkness was a part of her story, but it was not her story. Clara had rewritten her own narrative, one filled with light, hope, and the knowledge that no matter what happens, she would always find her way out of the shadows. As Clara walked away from the woods one last time, she looked back at the tunnel that had once seemed so overwhelming. It was now nothing more than a memory, a chapter closed. Clara was free. The darkness had lost its power, and she had emerged stronger than ever. The whispers were no longer a part of her life. Clara knew that the journey was not over. There would be other challenges, other struggles, but she had learned that facing them was the key to overcoming them. She had found peace, and in that peace she had found herself. The end of the tunnel was just the beginning of a new, brighter path, and Clara was ready to walk it. Clara woke up to the soft glow of dawn, the first light of the morning shining through her window. She stretched her arms and took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sunlight on her skin. The past few months had been challenging, but they had also brought her closer to understanding herself. Clara had found strength in the darkest of places, and now every new day felt like a gift. The world around her had changed, and so had she. No longer burdened by the fears that once held her captive, Clara was free. She knew that there would be days of struggle ahead, but she also knew that she could face them with a heart full of hope. She had walked through the shadows, and now she stood in the light, ready for whatever came next. Clara spent her days helping others who were struggling with their own fears. She volunteered at local shelters and spent time talking to people who had faced hardships similar to her own. Her story had become a source of inspiration for many, and she was determined to help others find their way out of the darkness. The more Clara helped, the more she healed. She had learned that the road to healing was not just about self-care, but about sharing the light with others. Each person she helped was a reminder of the strength that lay within all of us. And with each smile she received in return, Clara knew she was on the right path. One afternoon, Clara sat by the lake reflecting on everything she had been through. The whispers were gone, but the lessons they had taught her were still fresh in her mind. She thought about how far she had come from the frightened girl in the tunnel to the woman who had found peace. Clara knew that her journey wasn't just about her own healing, it was about helping others to find their light as well. She had found her purpose in the pain, and she was ready to embrace it fully. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but Clara knew that as long as she had her purpose, she could face anything. As Clara walked through the forest, she noticed how vibrant the world seemed. The trees, once dark and foreboding, were now full of life and energy. The birds were singing, the wind was soft, and the sky was a clear blue. Everything felt renewed, as if the world itself was healing, just as she had healed. The light that had once been so hard to find was now everywhere. It was in the small moments, the laughter of children, the warmth of a hug, the beauty of a sunset. Clara realized that the light had always been there, but it had taken her darkness to help her see it. Now, with every step, she was walking in the light, a light that she knew would guide her forever. Years passed, but Clara never forgot the lessons she had learned in the tunnel. She had built a life full of love, peace, and purpose, and she had made it her mission to help others find the same. The whispers no longer haunted her, but their presence had shaped her into the person she was today. Clara's legacy wasn't just the healing she had experienced, it was the way she had used her struggles to help others. She had become a beacon of hope for those still lost in the darkness. And as she walked forward, Clara knew that no matter what, the light would always be with her. As Clara continued her journey, she occasionally felt the whisper of her past creeping back into her thoughts. It wasn't fear that followed her now, but memories of the darkness she had once endured. However, instead of feeling frightened, Clara felt a sense of peace. She no longer feared the past, she had learned from it. One day, while walking through the village, Clara overheard a conversation between two strangers. They spoke of the same tunnel she had once wandered through. The tunnel, they said, had always been a place of mystery and fear for the people in the village. But now, hearing the stories through Clara's eyes, they began to see it differently. The tunnel was no longer a place of terror, it had become a symbol of strength and survival. Clara realized that the whispers, once haunting, had given her something powerful, a deeper understanding of herself. The memories she carried were not just reminders of fear, they were also reminders of her resilience. Each experience, no matter how painful, had shaped her into the person she had become. As Clara shared her story with others, she noticed how many people carried their own fears, their own memories. And just like her, they were learning to find the strength to move forward. The power of memory, when embraced, could bring healing. It was not about forgetting the past, but about using it as a stepping stone toward a brighter future. Over time, Clara started a support group for those who had faced their own tunnels of darkness. It was a safe space where people could share their experiences and heal together. The group grew, and with each meeting, Clara could feel the weight of her own past becoming lighter. The support group became a sanctuary for many, a place where healing was possible and hope was restored. Clara watched as individuals who had once been consumed by their fears began to open up and embrace the possibility of change. She had given them the same gift she had once received, the gift of transformation through shared understanding and support. One evening, after a particularly uplifting session, Clara sat alone by the lake, watching the stars. She reflected on her own transformation, from the frightened girl who had first entered the tunnel to the woman who now helped others emerge from their own darkness. In the quiet of the night, Clara realized that she had come full circle. The whispers that had once terrified her were now a part of her story. She had faced them, learned from them, and used them to guide others. Clara smiled, knowing that her journey had brought her to a place of peace, a place where she could truly embrace the light. The years passed, but Clara's work was far from over. She had built a life dedicated to helping others, but she never stopped learning. With each person she helped, she gained more wisdom and strength. The journey of healing was never truly finished, but Clara had learned to walk it with grace and confidence. One day, as she stood at the edge of the forest, Clara realized that the path ahead was full of endless possibilities. She had learned that healing was a continuous journey, not a destination. And as she took the first step into the next chapter of her life, Clara knew that no matter where it led, she would always have the strength to keep moving forward. Clara woke up early one morning, the sunlight filtering softly through the curtains. It was a new day, but it felt different. There was a quiet sense of anticipation in the air. As she walked outside, the world seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something. She realized that her journey wasn't just about healing anymore, it was about embracing the future. For the first time, Clara felt a deep sense of excitement. She was no longer bound by the past. The tunnel, the whispers, and the darkness were all behind her now. What lay ahead was a world full of possibilities, and Clara was ready to embrace them with open arms. She smiled, knowing that the light beyond the tunnel was brighter than she could have ever imagined. As Clara's life began to settle into a peaceful rhythm, she received a letter that would change everything. It was an invitation to speak at a global conference on healing and personal growth. The letter was unexpected, but Clara couldn't ignore the excitement that bubbled inside her. This was her chance to share her story on a bigger scale, to help more people find the light in their own tunnels. The decision wasn't easy, but Clara knew deep down that this was the next step in her journey. She had spent years healing, but now she had the opportunity to help others on an even larger scale. The adventure that awaited her filled her with a sense of purpose, and she packed her bags, ready for the next chapter of her life. At the conference, Clara was surrounded by people from all walks of life, each with their own stories of struggle and survival. The energy in the room was electric, filled with hope and determination. Clara spoke about the whispers in the tunnel, the darkness she had overcome, and the strength she had found within herself. As she spoke, Clara could see the impact of her words. People were nodding, tears were flowing, and hands were reaching out for support. She had touched hearts, opened minds, and reminded everyone that healing was possible. The gathering of souls had become a space for connection, where people could share their struggles and find solace in one another. Clara's speech was a turning point not just for the people in the room, but for her as well. Afterward, she received countless messages of gratitude from those whose lives had been touched by her words. Many shared their own stories of hardship and healing, and Clara felt honored to be a part of their journeys. The ripple effect of her message spread far and wide. She started receiving invitations to speak at other events, to write books, and to create programs that would help people navigate their own tunnels of darkness. The whispers she had once feared were now fueling a movement of hope, and Clara felt a deep sense of fulfillment as she realized the impact she was making. As Clara continued her work, she found herself becoming a bridge between two worlds, the world of fear and the world of healing. She had once been lost in the darkness, but now she was leading others into the light. She knew that this wasn't just her journey anymore. It was the journey of everyone who had ever faced their own tunnel of fear. Clara built a network of support, creating safe spaces for people to gather, share, and heal. She wasn't just telling her story, she was empowering others to tell their own. With each passing day, the world around her grew brighter, and Clara knew that her work was far from finished. The journey was ongoing, and she was honored to be a guide. One evening, as Clara walked through a forest near her home, she paused to reflect on the path she had taken. She realized that, although the tunnel was behind her, there was still so much more to discover. The unseen path ahead was full of mystery, but it no longer held fear. Instead, it held promise. Clara closed her eyes and listened to the sounds of nature around her, the rustling leaves, the distant chirping of birds, the soft breeze. She knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the same courage that had brought her through the tunnel. The path was hers to walk, and she would continue to move forward, knowing that every step brought her closer to a future full of light and possibility. As Clara sat by the window one quiet evening, she couldn't help but reflect on everything she had experienced. Her journey had been long and filled with challenges, but it had also been full of growth and transformation. What amazed her most was the realization that every step she had taken had led her to this moment, one of peace and purpose. With a heart full of gratitude, Clara made a decision. She would not just continue helping others, she would expand her work, reaching even more people who were in need of hope and healing. The whispers in the tunnel, once so haunting, had now become the foundation of her new mission to show others that no matter how dark it may seem, there is always a way out into the light. Clara's decision to expand her work came with a sense of excitement and determination. She reached out to others who had similar passions, creating a team of people who shared her vision for healing. Together, they began to develop workshops, programs, and resources that could help people from all walks of life find their way through their own tunnels of darkness. The journey was just beginning. Clara knew there would be many more challenges ahead, but she also knew that she was not alone. She had built a network of like-minded individuals who were just as committed to bringing light into the world. They were a team of warriors, all dedicated to helping others heal, grow, and thrive. As Clara's work expanded, the ripple effect grew wider. More and more people began to reach out for help, and Clara's programs became a beacon of hope for those lost in their own struggles. The whispers, which once felt like a burden, had now become a guiding light for others. Every person Clara helped became a part of the larger wave of healing that was spreading through the world. The stories of recovery were endless, and each one was a testament to the power of shared experiences and the strength of the human spirit. Clara could see the difference she was making, and with each success, she felt more connected to her purpose. The world was beginning to change, one whisper of hope at a time. One afternoon, as Clara stood at the edge of a cliff, looking out at the vast expanse of the world before her, she realized that her journey had only just begun. The tunnel was behind her, but there were still countless unknowns in front of her. The future was full of possibilities, both exciting and uncertain, but Clara was ready to embrace whatever came next. She had learned that the unknown wasn't something to fear, it was something to embrace. Each new experience brought with it the potential for growth, healing, and transformation. Clara was no longer afraid of the future. She welcomed it with open arms, knowing that the whispers she had once feared had shaped her into a woman strong enough to face anything. As Clara's work continued to grow, she became a bridge between the hearts of those who had faced hardship and those who were willing to listen and help. She saw how powerful it was when people opened their hearts to one another, sharing their struggles and triumphs in a safe and supportive environment. It was this connection, this bond between souls, that made all the difference. Clara often reflected on how far she had come. From the lonely, fearful girl in the tunnel to the woman standing on the bridge between hearts, she had come a long way. The journey had shaped her into someone who could see the light in others, even when they couldn't see it in themselves. And in return, she had become a source of light for them. One day, after a long day of speaking to a group of people about the power of resilience, Clara sat in a quiet room, reflecting on everything she had learned. She was no longer the same person who had walked into the tunnel all those years ago. She had changed. And in that change, she had discovered a quiet strength within herself. It wasn't the kind of strength that demanded attention, it was the kind of strength that came from peace. The ability to face challenges with grace, to move forward without fear, and to trust in the journey ahead. Clara realized that this quiet strength was what had carried her through the darkest moments of her life, and it would continue to guide her as she moved into the future. As the final whisper fades into the distance, Clara stands at the threshold of a new chapter, one filled with hope, strength, and endless possibilities. The journey that began in darkness has now blossomed into a life of light and purpose. Each step she took, each challenge she faced, has led her to this moment of profound transformation. And so, dear listener, remember, no tunnel is too dark, no journey too long. There is always a way out, always a light waiting for you at the end. Embrace your path, trust in your strength, and know that the whispers of your heart will guide you always. Thank you for joining Clara on this remarkable journey. May the whispers of your own heart lead you to a future filled with peace, love, and unshakable hope.